Hi, you are on the Revenge Eddie channel.
I am 36 years old, and the closest thing I own to a compass is a box of Sidewalk chalk. It sits by my front door in a cracked plastic tub, colors worn to nubs, powder dusting the lid like pollen. I bought it on a whim the week I moved back to my hometown, telling myself it was for my niece. It turned out to be for me. I left this town at 19 with a scholarship and the certainty that leaving was the bravest verb. I returned 15 years later with a burned-out voice and a suitcase that smelled faintly of office carpet and old coffee. I had spent a decade in brand strategy, which is a polite way of saying I made nice words for things that didn't always deserve them. I learned to smile with my whole face while my ribcage rattled like a drawer of cutlery. The migraines made a metronome of my weeks. The doctor said, simplify or pay later. I decided to pay now and simplify later, which is how I ended up on my mother's couch with a heating pad and a box of chalk. Home was the same bungalow 2 streets from the elementary school I once hated for its smell of glue and caution. My mother had kept my old bedroom nearly intact, a fading poster of a mountain, a shelf of paperbacks with cracked spines, a desk where I once learned to type with my wrists held too high. Temporary, I promised her, and tried to make rent with casseroles and lawn mowing, which she pretended to accept as legal tender. She put me to work fixing the squeak in the hall door and making lists for the grocery store. I slept like someone who had finally stepped off a treadmill she didn't know how to stop. On the second afternoon, my niece Lila asked if we could walk to the park. She is 8 and devout about snacks. We packed pretzels, a bottle of water, and the chalk tub I claimed was hers. The park matched my memory, swings with chain squeaks like a tired choir, a slide that burns summer knees, a patch of asphalt near the hoops where the painted lines had faded into ghost lanes. Draw something, Lila ordered with the executive certainty of the very young. I drew a crooked sun. She drew a cat with suspicious eyes and an extravagant tail. Then she pointed to the empty space and said, "Make a way." We went back the next day and the next. Lila brought friends, I brought stencils cut from cereal boxes. The kids drew mazes, a bakery selling invisible cupcakes, a hospital for worms. I drew little maps, a loop around the slide, an arrow to the drinking fountain, a compass rose that insisted north was toward the oak tree. I wrote tiny instructions the way I used to leave notes to myself during tense calls: breathe here, watch for ants, left foot, right foot. The chalk turned my hands bright, for once I liked being marked. One morning the school principal, Mrs. Conrad, stopped at the park on her walk to work. She stood with her coffee and watched a line of children tiptoe along a chalk path I'd drawn. "Are you the one with the maps?" she asked. I admitted it, expecting a scolding about liability or permanence. She smiled the way teachers do when an experiment goes better than expected. "Would you consider doing this outside the school on Fridays? We have walking buses, groups of kids who walk in together, and they'd love a new route." So I did. On Friday mornings I got up before sunrise, walked to the school with the tub, and drew rivers that were only blue lines studded with chevron fish. I drew bridges like spare ribs. I drew a square labeled Museum of Found Leaves and taped up a sign inviting students to leave a leaf there for science or for no reason. The crossing guard, Mr. B, saved me a cone. Parents who once scrolled their phones began to look down at the pavement and then at each other. Children arrived early to argue about whether dragons should be allowed to cross bridges without paying chalk tolls. I learned to carry quarters for vending machines and band-aids for knees. There is something about chalk that forgives. It lets you be imprecise. It expects erasure. When it rains, the drawings blur and the pavement returns somehow cleaner. I needed that kind of kindness. I was tired of a life where everything had to be pixel perfect, where a comma could earn you a meeting with 4 people and a chart. My mother volunteered me for the library's community day. "They need a sidewalk artist," she said, already pressing a flyer into my hand. "I'm not an artist," I told her. She raised one eyebrow, the family's universal sign for, "Deny it if you want, the casserole is already in the oven." The librarian, Tasha, met me with tape and a grin. You make the sidewalk magic, I'll get lemonade. I chalked a rough outline of our town, just a guess, and asked passersby to add a place they loved. A grandmother drew the diner that closed last year and wrote "Best Peach Pie" beneath it in a tidy hand. A teenager drew the skate park and the exact curve of the rail where he'd broken his wrist. He labeled it "Worth It." A man with a veteran's hat drew the river and wrote, "I sat here and decided to stay." Kids added a candy store that exists only in memory, and a tree that looks like a whale if you tilt your head. The map became a quilt. Tasha brought lemonade and said, "This is the busiest it's been all summer." My chest bees, those old anxious buzzings, settled. Not gone, but occupied. I realized I was building a map of belonging rather than streets, and that I had missed maps like this all my adult life. Work found me through those drawings the way ivy finds brick. The farmer's market hired me to letter stall signs. A daycare asked for a chalk welcome path with paw prints and nap-friendly arrows. The senior center wanted a treasure hunt that ended at the shade where someone had set up a checkers table. I charged what felt fair, then, when people insisted it was too little, charged slightly more. It wasn't a salary, it was something better for a while, proof that I could trade attention for groceries. There was one person I did not expect to see, Jen, my high school best friend, whom I stopped speaking to the week I left for college. We had mispronounced each other's dreams. She thought I was snobbish for leaving. I accused her of being scared. We both excelled at stubbornness. She moved back after a takeoff that never quite left the runway. I stayed away and let her messages go unanswered. At the library day, she arrived with a stroller and a haircut that said, "I do not have time for mirrors." We froze, then laughed, then apologized in a tangle that made strangers smile. She invited me to dinner. I went. Her daughter demanded we draw a road from the couch to the kitchen. We did and wiped it up with a sponge. A pale outline remained in the morning, proof that paths can linger without trapping you. Mrs. Conrad asked if I'd lead a Saturday workshop called Drawing the Way There. I wrote a tiny curriculum that began with, "Draw the place you are, draw the place you want to be, and connect them with the wildest line you can imagine." We added landmarks that were feelings instead of buildings, the corner where I felt brave, the bench where I almost cried, the clover patch that forgave me. Parents drew what they wished someone had told them at 10. A boy drew the library and labeled it "Quiet That Likes Me." In September, the park hosted a harvest fair. Jars of jam gleamed like stained glass. A band on the gazebo played songs that sounded like porch lights turning on. Lila and her friends drew a dragon that wound around the drinking fountain and pretended to blow bubbles. A boy drew a spaceship and a landing pad labeled "Grandma's." I walked the perimeter refilling chalk bowls, offering kneeling pads, and giving a speech that was really consent disguised as a tutorial: use as much space as you need. Let the river run into the parking lot if it has to. Maps are invitations, not fences. Halfway through, the drizzle began. Kids squealed and drew faster. Adults looked up, hesitated, then stayed. Wet chalk deepens in color, the drawings took on the soft glow of pastels. I wrote across the basketball key, "This map expects rain." Several people nodded the way you do when a sentence finds a place you didn't know needed naming. That night I walked past the school. The rain had strengthened. The fish in my chalk river blurred into bright streaks. The compass by the oak tree faded to a pale memory. The ache arrived, the one that says good things end and you should never have started. Mr. B stepped from his car under an umbrella and said, "Clears by morning." He tipped his hat. "See you Friday." There is a stubborn kindness in people who refuse to be surprised by the cycle of wash and draw, lose and make again. I did not go back to brand strategy. The migraines dimmed without fluorescent rooms and manufactured urgency. I built a small schedule: Fridays at the school, the market on Saturdays, the daycare welcome path every first Monday, the senior center hunt on the last Thursday. I kept my box of chalk by the door and a towel in my backpack for weather that changed its mind. My mother stopped calling this a phase and started asking, "What are you mapping this week?" Jen and I made a habit of walking after dinner. Sometimes we talked about the past in the cautious way people do when the ground is new. Sometimes we said nothing and let our steps be the sentence. Once she said, "I thought leaving made you brave." I said, "I thought staying made you loyal." We both laughed, and it sounded like the untying of a knot. One Friday, a boy stood at the start of my latest route, 2 blue lines with a chalk canoe, and refused to walk it. He said he couldn't cross rivers. I drew a tiny ferry, a rectangle with a smile. "Ferries count," I told him. He stepped aboard, carefully, 2 shoes inside the box. Afterward, Mr. B whispered, "He hasn't crossed the painted lines all year." It was not a miracle, just a small negotiation with fear. Sometimes that is enough to change a morning. I still wake some days and count the ceiling cracks like a rosary, bargaining with a god I don't have grammar for. The bees still buzz when the mail brings envelopes with windows. But when I lift the chalk tub, and the air smells like a storm that might change its mind, my ribs loosen. The world offers me a rectangle of asphalt and the chance to draw away from here to here, because on most days that is the most honest destination. My maps do not fix the town. They do not guarantee that anyone arrives exactly where they meant to go. They do something gentler. They invite people to walk together long enough to remember we are mostly headed the same direction, toward morning, toward each other, toward the next place that needs a bright arrow, and the word breathe written beside it. Tomorrow I will redraw the river and put the fish back in it. I will add a bridge that looks slightly different because nothing stays the same, not even chalk. I will tuck a leaf into the Museum of Found Leaves and admire a new label, for science or for no reason. I will wave at Mr. B, nod to Mrs. Conrad, and smile at the strangers who are becoming less strange. I will hand Lila the blue stick because she always wants the ocean. And I will draw the line that goes from here to here again, as if the asphalt is new every time we choose it.